I was only about 6 years old at the time. My mother led me for so long through the woods along a trail barely comprehensible, until we finally reached the old mansion. It was far less decayed back then, still having electricity and running water, but somehow still felt run down, ancient. "Why are we here?" I remember asking her. I was scared. Maybe she could see it. She looked at me with eyes that I thought expressed annoyance, but I now know conveyed pity. She didn't answer. Instead, she motioned for me to go inside. I knew from the moment I first stepped inside that I would hate this place. It felt lonely, destitute. My mother led me upstairs and pointed towards a door. "You have to go in there," she told me. "Why?" I started to ask, but she cut me off. "You need to," she said. I did as I was told. I was only a child after all. After I stepped into the room, she slammed the door shut behind me. I heard her bolting it from the other side. I hit at it. "Mom, what are you doing?" She was crying when she responded. "Something is coming for you. You need to stay here, to stay safe." She used the word something in describing what was coming for me. Something. She wasn't using the word monster yet, but she would. Yes, she most certainly would. It was a bathroom she had locked me in, antiquated and rotting. The toilet still functioned, and there was running water, but it was otherwise decrepit and run down. There was a gap between the bottom of the door and the floorboard, big enough for food to be slid under. I would stay locked in that room for weeks, maybe even months, because a monster was coming after me, don't you know? A monster. "Mother!" I remember shouting through the door after a couple of days. "Won't the monster kill you when it arrives? Shouldn't you be in here with me?" But she told me she was safe, that the monster couldn't hurt her, and it was me that it was after. She slid food under the gap 3 times a day, and I was always grateful for it. Sometimes she would read stories to me, sitting against the door. She would tell me it wouldn't be long now. After the monster came, I could come out. I was scared and alone in that bathroom. Sometimes I would think back to when I was younger. I would be lying in bed at night, listening to my mother sing me my favorite lullabies, telling me everything was okay, that I should go to sleep, that there was nothing to worry about. She would run her fingers through my hair when she did it. I would stare out of my bedroom window as she sang, looking up at the stars. They seemed to twinkle in the rhythm of her voice. I started singing those lullabies, locked in that room, thinking of those times with my mother, hoping one day life would go back to that. Sometimes she would sit outside the locked door and sing along with me. I liked when she did that. It was the closest I had to what had previously been standard for me. Sometimes I would be fast asleep lying in that room, and would awaken to a fierce growl or roar echoing throughout the old house. I knew the monster was here. I would jump up in a flash and yell for my mother. She would assure me that she was fine. "The monster can't hurt me," she reminded me. "You're just lucky you're locked safely in that room," she would say. But I started to question how safe I truly was. One night, after a few weeks in that bathroom, I had a terrible nightmare. I remember it vividly. My mother stood outside the door and told me that the monster left last night, that it was safe to come out now. Then, she unlocked the door. But when it opened, it wasn't my mother standing on the other side. It was the monster. It was grotesque looking, like nothing from this world. It lunged at me and began to rip me apart. It didn't feel like a dream anymore. The pain felt real. It was eating me alive, taking large chunks of my flesh and devouring me. It was surreal, and it went on for minutes. It was like nothing I thought could ever happen, and slowly my consciousness started to fade away. The world grew darker around me, and the pain receded. Eventually, there was no longer any pain at all, just darkness, all-encompassing darkness. I was dead. And the moment it felt as though death was finally settling in was the precise moment when I woke up. Still in lightlessness, I thought I was truly dead for a moment. That death was just quiet darkness. But it was just that the bathroom light had burned out. "Mom!" I shouted. "It's really dark in here." She didn't respond to me. I could hear her crying as she walked away from the door. So from that moment forward, my time in that room was in complete and utter darkness. I'm not sure how many weeks passed after that, but I would still wake up to the sounds of the monster. It was happening more and more frequently. I could never hear it clearly while listening for it, but those growls and shrieks would wake me from my sleep. My mother would stay by the door less and less. And then, one day I noticed her sliding far more food than usual underneath the door. Weeks worth of food. I knew what it meant. She was going to leave me. I couldn't bear it. I began pounding on the door. "Mother, please let me out of here. I don't care about the monster. I don't care. Just let me out. I can't stay in here anymore." She didn't respond to me. Instead, she sat by the door and sang to me, my favorite lullabies from when I was younger. All night she sang. She was crying at the same time, but still singing. I should have cherished it. I should have listened and relished in those last moments we had together. But I didn't. I just pounded on the door the entire night, screaming at her, begging for her to let me out. After uncountable hours, she finally stopped singing. "Goodbye, my son," she said. Her footsteps echoed as she made her way down the stairs, and I heard the front door quietly close behind her. I was by myself now, alone in the dark, locked in, abandoned. Words can't describe the betrayal I felt, the loneliness, the seclusion and desolation. Even with everything that's happened since, I can say with certainty that that was the worst I have ever felt. Nothing will ever be able to match it. Those last few days were unbearable. I was still in pitch blackness, and I had eaten the last of my food. I thought I was going to starve. But then, I started to feel something new. Something I had repressed for all this time. Anger. Anger at being abandoned. Anger for being lonely. Anger for being locked away from the world. Fury. Rage. I went to the bathroom door and struck it as hard as I could. The door shattered away before me. Light shone in, and I could see myself. My hands were massive and hideous. I saw the debris of the door littered before me, and that's when I became aware of it. I had finally realized I was the monster. I suppose my mother knew what I was turning into, and she had a tough choice to make. She could have ended my life and spared the world of what I would become. But I guess she couldn't bear it. I suppose she thought of me living on in some way was better than me not living at all. I think back now and realize how horrible those weeks must have been for her as well. as I slowly transformed into this beast. You see, I can think these thoughts and write these words, but if I tried to speak to you, you wouldn't understand me. It would sound normal to me, but what you would hear would be the shrieks and growls of a monstrous creature. I suppose I was making those sounds as I slept, and would sometimes wake myself up. And that last day when she sang to me for hours, I see what that must have been like for her. I hid at the door begging for her to let me out. But what she must have heard was a horrible feral monster smashing at the door trying to break through. But still, she stayed all night, singing to me. Maybe she correctly guessed that some part of me could still understand. Countless years have passed since then. What was already an ancient house back then is in far worse shape now. And I hate this place just as much as I knew I would from the moment I stepped in. At night, I run through the local woods catching wildlife. It's what I live off of now. Sometimes, I see some brave townsfolk venturing into these woods. I've even tried talking to them a few times, but they don't understand me. And oh, how scared they were. How they ran. How they screamed. I suppose the town at the end of the forest must have many tales about me. The disgusting and ghastly monster of the old mansion. I'm probably the boogeyman that will come after misbehaving children. The shadow peering back at them from the darkness of the woods. And sometimes, on the calmest of nights, they may even hear the horrifying shrieks, squeals, and growls echoing down onto the town from the trees above. Oh, how it must scare the children. But I hope this letter reaches you all in good form. This is my tale. My story. This is what I am. I mean you all no harm. And you can tell those children that what they hear isn't so unnatural. Tell them that I wasn't always so different from them, and those sounds aren't as they appear. No matter how scary they sound on those calm, windless nights, they come from a sad, lonely, and broken creature as it looks up towards the stars at night and watches them twinkle, singing its favorite lullabies.